Man, that's gotta be one of the most nostalgic sounds from my childhood. I remember either playing or watching my older brother play Splinter Cell 1 on the GameCube when I was younger. Splinter Cell Chaos Theory represents one of the few examples of a Western game that features the focus of intent of a Japanese game. Typically, Western games attempt to do everything and infrequently do everything well, think Skyrim, versus Japanese games that converge their design goals on a specific experience, think Metroid. Naturally, there exist rules to every exception and exceptions to every rule, but I think this trend is reasonably visible. Chaos Theory subverts the trend by including in the game only what needs be included, allowing the development team to insert details that convey a legitimate care for quality that appears to be lost in many contemporary Western games. For example, the primary appeal of this game is stealth, so you spend a non-trivial amount of time disabling lights. If you attempt to shoot one out but miss just nearly, you can hear Fisher quietly condemning himself. Shit. Anyway, this is an in-depth analysis of Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, with spoilers, so if you'd like the mysteries of this 14-year-old game to remain equally as mysterious by avoiding spoilers, this video may not be for you, but come on, you're 14 years late to the party. The plot in this game is largely irrelevant because I sense it's simply a vehicle to contextualize the gameplay, so I won't be addressing it in much detail. If knowing the essentials of the story would provide you some peace of mind, though, you can find the short of it in the description. However, one thing I feel a deep obligation to correcting is that this guy's name...
You must be Dvorak.
Dvorak, huh?
Dvorak.
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 Dvorak's keeper. Dvorak's output
should be pronounced Dvorak.
How do I get its output?
Before I discuss the gameplay, I'll reflect on how stealth games can approach players saving and loading their progress after making a mistake or action with unfavorable results. Of course, this topic wouldn't contain any controversy if all players played with dignity and accepted the consequences of their decisions in the first place, but because that cannot be expected of all players, developers can choose to implement measures to control player behavior, or choose not to. A few strategies exist, and I'll knock out the existing method first, which is the ability to quick save and quick load at any time. Ultimately, this is the safest option to implement because if the player decides to abuse this, then she is hampering her own fun, and the developers cannot be accountable for that. Simultaneously, however, this preemptively avoids any player frustration because stealth games reside in a category disparate from many others that makes replaying a section already successfully completed annoying rather than rewarding just to catch up to where you made an error. Although the following example is neither a stealth game nor is the developer strategy even technologically possible when Chaos Theory released, it would effectively skirt this scandalous player behavior, and it's used in Dark Souls. I can't believe I could only go a few minutes this time without mentioning it. In Dark Souls, the game automatically saves every few seconds, so the player has no option but to accept their choices. Another option is restricting saves to specific physical areas exclusively. In the case of Chaos Theory, it would be integrated into the universe by using computers to save progress. This method just works because the player would very likely only use a computer when it is safe, so if the player gets a bad save, he has no one to blame but himself. The method would also encourage exploration of different routes to accomplish the mission because the player may be seduced by the incentive of a save location in an area other than the one he's in. However, making available multiple routes is not the core appeal of Chaos Theory. Rather, it is to apply your knowledge and competency in stealth to progress through the largely linear course. For the design concept of having multiple available routes to achieve a goal to feel robust, the game must be built for that purpose, as is the case in Dishonored. The linearity does interfere, though, with creative problem solving, shown here near the end of the game in which you must defuse bombs planted in advance by this guy. You're informed at the beginning of the sequence that bombs, plural, have been planted, and after I observed that he comes to trash talk Fisher while he's defusing the first one, I figured I could place some wall mines from where he'll be likely walking to after he's done gapping his gums. But the game doesn't accept this and just rejects me. I understand, being able to kill him here would break the entire sequence, but I was nevertheless disappointed when I wasn't rewarded. I'm aware I just said that the style of linearity present in the game best suits the design goals of it, but this is one of the unfortunate sacrifices. You get a tight feeling game at the expense of reward for creative freedom. Let's more transparently define what tight feeling implies, because it's a term I've witnessed used many times without further clarification as it is relevant to the context. Though a term often used to describe a game's controls, a tight game is defined by the following 4 traits. 1. Simple rules with simple, conspicuous consequences. 2. Beauty in both the playstyles of path of least resistance and high-skilled non-stop action. 3. A focus on meaningful player input, meaning the game doesn't rely on cutscenes and QuickTime events. And 4. Immediate audio and or visual feedback indicating an action was either started, completed, or both. Because of the episodic nature of the game's missions, I reckon it could benefit from one-off appearances of a game's game-altering element ranging from a mission or a segment of one, where your feet leave the impressions in the snow that guards can detect and follow, or one where there are caged dogs that can spot you and bark, calling guards to the general area, etc. Another manipulation of the game's systems could have manifested itself as the environment disabling different parts of your equipment. For example, a segment spent in the heavy rain that prevents smoke and gas grenades from diffusing properly, and sticky cameras attaching to surfaces. A segment spent on a hot day on black asphalt as to make the temperature difference between a human and the ground less stark, causing the thermal imaging goggles to offer much less utility. A segment where a gas leak in a room prevents you from firing your gun, which actually is done in the game.
Yeah, I can smell it. Some kind of gas leak.
It could be enough to be a serious explosive hazard. We can't have any firing in the engine room.
Wonderful.
And don't expect the enemy to be smart enough to realize that. They might still open fire on you if they see you.
A segment with ubiquitous steam that would render ineffective the night vision goggles because of the refraction of light off the water vapor molecules, what was done in the bathhouse level. Or a segment in which there are lights that cannot be shot out or temporarily disabled with the OCP. Wait, that was done too. Chaos Theory really did exploit many of the game's features in interesting ways.
And if the DPRK intercepts it,
Then this mission is a waste of time.
DPRK intercepts it,
Then this mission is a waste of time.
You may posit that gimmicks are cheap tricks that developers should avoid, but in fact, excessive gimmick use is what many games aim to use but fail to fulfill. A gimmick is simply a contrived scenario in which a yet-seen approach to a core mechanic is explored. And like wringing a towel of its water, games should exhaust all possible expressions of the core mechanics, and until exhaustion is achieved, the game is incomplete. Now, a not entirely discernible line separates a complete game and an overfilled game. Sequels exist to further investigate any previously untouched exploitations. If all unique contrivances in the entire Halo series were used in one campaign, it would be undeniably, unpleasantly interminable. So, devs must maintain a reasonable scope, but determining what's reasonable versus excessive is highly context dependent, especially in the domain of open world and open sandbox games such as Zelda Breath of the Wild. Making this determination is much more self-evident in linear games, which is why more linear games feel tight than do open games. Perhaps it would introduce more complication than necessary to an elegantly simple construction that is this game's systems, but it may have been interesting to incorporate a leader and second-in-command guard to every troop. 2 guards in every cluster would have radios, permitting only these 2 guards to communicate remotely to one another. They would tell each other when they think they've noticed you as when they give their barks, the term used in gaming when an enemy will announce what they're thinking. Naturally, in real life, no one would say aloud,
What's that? I heard something. You're always hearing something. This time I'm pretty sure. Do you hear that?
because that thought would simply appear in the mind, but this feature exists so the player knows that the enemy will be temporarily changing his behavior. The radios would make both guards mildly alert until the guard that noticed something returns to normal. It wouldn't make a large difference, but a subtle one that could make navigating through an area that little bit more challenging. It would add 2 variable components to each level, One, the mystery in the mind of the player, wondering when the first radio guard will appear and where the second one is relative to the appearance of the first. And two, changes the player's behavior by altering her sense of priorities regarding which guard should be eliminated, if any, and in which order. I've advertised in the past my view that many games should be shorter because games often overstay their welcome. A game will introduce a novel idea and thoroughly explore its implications, but then continue to flog the dead horse instead of advancing to the next concept. I must say that this is one of the only games that I propose should actually be longer because it forewent many ideas that would add spice and valuable variety to the gameplay. But I know this wasn't technologically accomplishable at the time because they were already cramming information onto the disc. For example, Chaos Theory could have segregated the types of guards less, but here's another classic dichotomy of adding complexity to this game. Would mixing different tiers of guards enhance the puzzle-solving requirements in the player's mind by forcing him to prioritize which guard should be addressed and in which order? Or would that detract from the fundamental nucleus of the game? One could argue that the puzzle-solving mindset emerges from all or most guards being equal in ability, and instead it is the level design and guard placement and routes that make each level unique. That's the fundamental question present. Is Splinter Cell Chaos Theory about level design, or rather threat assessment? In other words, is the game about the physical path through a level, and how roaming guards and stationary light sources and cameras interact with that route? Or is the game about reacting to diverse species of threats like guards with different loadouts and aggro sensitivities? Evidently, the devs pursued the former option of this game, and the superior option of this dichotomy is the former because it exhibits a more intelligible concept and more endorses smooth and fair stealth gameplay. The latter style is more suited to open world and open sandbox games, such as Metal Gear Solid 5, in which the variety of threats balances the more simple level designs. Also, there's no superior option because each is a response to the level design, and it all lies in a continuum. The more linear and controlled the environment, the less disparate the enemy types, but the more open the environment, the more disparate the enemy types. I view this simply as a best practice of game design. Existing in opposition to nearly all other game genres, stealth games are dissolved of their fun and suspense, like Sugar and Water, when the action starts, because this implies you're likely now live target practice for the NPCs. Indeed, the goal of a stealth game should satisfy is offering to the player information that the enemies do not have in order to conquer them. And in the case of Chaos Theory, express knowledge of the guard's intentions is necessary. Oftentimes this is packaged in the form of a simple patrol pattern that they're following, and other times it is to outright place Fisher in a grave. An early grave, but wow.
Came online.
Lasers. Lasers are so...
90s?
I was going to say 70s. Can you please stop making me feel old?
Got bad news for you, Sam. You are old.
Information can come in other varieties, like that which the player always has possession of, like night, thermal, and electromagnetic vision, as well as sticky cameras. But having information is equivalent to not having information, in a way. Fisher can reduce information by disabling light sources and cameras, and modulate information by way of making less or more noise. It is with this manipulation of information that the player interacts with the game's systems and defines his own experiences. The set of information provided to the player to interact with represents a minimalist approach to stealth. Don't confuse that with my saying it features the fewest elements necessary to create a compelling stealth game, but rather that it utilizes unconvoluted seeds of ideas to blossom a tree of dynamic gameplay. Ultimately, games that run in excess of parallel systems and mechanics feel less timeless. They intend to attract your attention briefly for a quick high, only for it to plummet just as rapidly. But fear not, for the sequel releases in a year's time. This phenomenon explains why any classic games you can conjure in your mind are minimalist in a similar way. Call of Duty Modern Warfare is often regarded as the best COD of all time because it has fun guns, simple kill streaks, and basic perks. Many later games implemented novel but depthless new mechanics. For the same reason as why Oddworld Abe's Odyssey is favored to its progeny. For the same reasons why earlier Dragon Age games like Origins are often preferred to later installments. For the same reasons Assassin's Creed games. For the same reason BioShock games, I'm looking at you, Infinite, And for the same reason, Splinter Cell games, like Splinter Cell Conviction.
I don't really have any convictions.
I covered multiple genres there to prove a point that no type of game secures a monopoly on this principle. Did I cherry pick? Well, considering I can't list every single game to ever exist, some cherry picking is necessary. I can also ensure a near guarantee that any game you may think enjoyed greater success from adding more complicated elements to the core gameplay actually either, firstly, weren't as successful but you were eluded by the flashiness of it, or, more likely, were added but didn't actually alter the way the core gameplay elements were manifested. This fashion of a minimalist approach to design permits the developers to insert meaningful and or satisfying details that would likely otherwise be determined inessential. At this video's inception, I mentioned Fisher's parenthetical comments when missing a shot of a light, but many other similar examples exist. If you incapacitate a guard and drop him in water, that counts as a kill because he would obviously drown, and you can identify this by enabling thermal vision and seeing his body temperature drop. At the fourth alarm, enemy AI becomes more intelligent. They attempt to ambush you, and they move furniture that changes the level geometry and how you must go about the level. Not all walls are created equal. You can shoot through less structural surfaces like doors and paper, whereas you cannot on a metal door. Shooting a sticky shocker into the water will shock the guard standing in it. You can use the OCP on this guy running on the treadmill, disabling it and rendering him unconscious from falling. All these bits just make sense as an extension of the rules of the Splinter Cell universe. Chaos Theory's dedication to simplicity is exceeded only by its dedication to simplicity, and it is this that I commend. There's an arid sterility to the level design, but a counterintuitively delightful one, similar to what one can find in the pleasantries of contemporary Japanese architecture.
This is a very tricky shot with the water in front of the right of the green. He is wisely taking his time.
To add one more parenthetical comment, lead designer Clint Hawking was remiss about not thinking to include the breaking of silencers after a predetermined number of shots fired, as does Metal Gear Solid.
And only recently you were talking about this, how Metal Gear gives you silencers that have what, like 5 shots in them or something before they're not silent?
A bit more, but they do break, yeah.
I think that's so awesome. Like, such a brilliant idea. I can't believe we didn't think of it.
Yeah, I can't think of everything.
Although the game would profit from such an annexation, its absence isn't much of a debt to quality. Naturally, the stealth in any stealth game is contrasted only by what follows detection. Of the available design approaches, Chaos Theory applies what is essentially a game over, because the guards' lethality of their guns is so swift that it might as well instantly load your previous save. It's possible to survive gunfire encounters and continue the level, but the player has few options to retaliate. Returning gunfire is not viable because Fisher's draw time is too slow, and running away won't get you anywhere quick enough to prevent a death in most cases. Really, guards hold sovereign competence in direct combat over him. As goes the expression for automobiles, preventative maintenance is the best form of maintenance. A similar notion applies here. Prevent yourself from detection to avoid any annoying scenarios. All these implications fit the style of stealth game this in fact is. If the player had a healthy chance to recuperate after gunfire began, she would feel a lesser obligation to maintaining stealth and find resorting to combat more acceptable. Discarding such a design decision is perfectly becoming of the game. Many people seem to promote games that are jack of all trades, but the implicit nature of this trait is that the game fulfills no one thing exceptionally, and games, among other forms of media, excel most palpably when a singular design concept is presented thoroughly. The 3D geometry of each level's design advances in complexity alongside the progression of the game, as do the basic staples. Cameras begin as a basic oscillating camera, then advance to have infrared sensors that can detect you even in the dark, then finally advance from wall-mounted to ceiling-mounted and have 360-degree rotation. Door security begins as a basic unlocked door, then advances to require a 4-digit code that can be overheard or interrogated from a guard or found on a computer, and finally advance to requiring retinal scans from a guard that you must grab and walk to the door. I would have liked to see further advancement for the cameras, such as a camera that cannot be disabled with the OCP, requiring the player to maneuver through a segment managing the perpetual risk of camera detection and complement to whatever other threats the segment offers. But again, though its absence is a shame, the game is not much poorer because of it. Regarding the doors, a fourth type could have been included in the form of requiring its unlock from a computer in a control room somewhere in the level. Even the floors are experimented with by including the Nightingale floor, but its implementation was restricted to such a small and insignificant area and used in one mission, so it didn't receive the level design spotlight it should have. Another possible floor-related design idea is having had one or a few rooms flooded for some reason, such that traveling through it would make Fisher's feet temporarily wet, imprinting his footsteps for a short distance once exiting the room. But fundamentally, most important variations on a motif are realized. Chaos Theory occupies whichever lobe in my brain that houses my favorite games. Its minimalist yet effectual approach to design has consecrated itself in Stealth Hall of Fame. Like an evergreen tree, playing it invariably and perpetually feels investing in all the best ways. Everything from the sound of holstering guns to Fisher's hands touching a pipe feels realistic in such a way that ushers me and my mind into the world. Even Fisher's locomotion is a wicked spectacle. The prowling is so smooth and so satisfying to witness. The game allows itself to breathe, like a competent musical composer carefully places silences in his piece, which exudes confidence. Chaos Theory is a confident game, and it will forever hold the license to make such an utterance.